Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, March 8th, 2024. The Supreme Court hears a challenge to the federal government's regulation of ghost guns, which are bought in kits of parts by mail order and online, assembled at home. They don't have serial numbers and are untraceable. We'll hear some of the oral argument and talk with Mike Macagnone, CQ Roll Call Legal Affairs reporter. Hurricane Milton is still on track to hit Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis and President Joe Biden urging those who have been ordered to leave to evacuate now. President Biden saying it's a matter of life and death. President also canceling his overseas trip to stay and monitor the hurricane response. And President Biden today traveling to Milwaukee to announce an EPA rule setting a 10-year deadline for cities to replace lead pipes. In this year's presidential campaign, Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, does a flurry of interviews, including ABC's The View. And Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, the Republican vice presidential nominee, holds a rally in Detroit. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu makes an appeal in a video message to the people of Lebanon to rise up and oppose Hezbollah. The White House has asked about journalist Bob Woodward's latest book, which quotes President Biden swearing when he's talking about Prime Minister Netanyahu. And former Republican Congressman Dave Hobson of Ohio has died. He served 18 years in the House. Joining us now to talk about today's Supreme Court oral argument in Garland v. Vanderstock about whether the federal government can ban ghost guns is Michael Macagnone, legal affairs reporter for CQ Roll Call. Thanks for being with us. So as you heard today's oral argument, did you get a sense which way the justices seem to be leaning? Is there a majority forming?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It seemed pretty favorable for the government for oral arguments, especially considering that previously in this case, 5 of the justices voted to keep the law in effect, or keep the rule in effect while the court fight played out. And the 2 justices who voted, the 2 conservative justices who voted in favor of that stay, were pretty friendly to the government's arguments this morning. A lot was said about omelets and other analogies like that, actually, about, when does a collection of ingredients become an omelet? When can you call, eggs and onions and peppers a Western omelet? And when can you call a collection of gun parts a gun that you have to put a serial number on and do a background check to sell somebody? And over the course of arguments, it seemed pretty obvious that the government was gaining some ground with its arguments about the fact that these gun parts kits are sold maybe 1 or 2 steps shy of being a fully functional firearm, that you just have to remove some material or drill a few holes. And that seemed to resonate with the justices.
This case involves the Gun Control Act of 1968. Are there definitions in that law that they took a look at?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of the oral arguments hinged on some language in the law and how broadly to apply it, talking about the law regulates firearms and things that could be, quotes, readily be converted to being a firearm. And there was a lot of back and forth in the oral arguments as well as in the briefing about whether sort of what's commonly known as an 80% framer receiver could be under the umbrella of being readily converted into a firearm, and whether that language applies to the framer receiver section of the law at all. There was some argument from the challengers that Congress didn't mean to give the ATF carte blanche to decide that any milled piece of steel in the country could be considered a framer receiver that's just a few steps removed from being part of a firearm. But on the other side, the Biden administration was arguing that it would be very easy if the ATF is restricted here for a lot of people to sell guns that were unregulated.
Was there any discussion about the extent of the problem of ghost guns, and is that important in the legal arguments?
Well, the legal experts I've spoken to have said that the practical impacts are not something that the justices will necessarily take account of sort of explicitly in their decisions. But the impacts of ghost guns and the reality on the ground did come up several times in oral arguments. Elizabeth Prelogar, the Solicitor General, brought up the fact that there are thousands of these guns that were on the streets and involved in crimes, and police have not been able to trace, who purchased them or who may have used them because they've been sold without regulation in the past.
We're talking with Michael Macagnone from CQ Roll Call. Last term, the Supreme Court struck down a regulation on bump stocks, devices that can make semi-automatic weapons fire as fast as machine guns. But that involved a different firearms law. But is there any potential crossover to this case, at least in the reasoning?
I think that the big difference that people are going to see between these two cases is talking about the statutory language. There is language in the statute that was at issue today, the Gun Control Act, that talks about Congress put explicitly into the law that there is sort of an umbrella catch-all term, I mentioned it before, that things could be readily be converted into a firearm. And that was not present in the case from the prior term talking about bump stocks. So Congress in this statute intended to capture people operating at the margins, trying to create something that's close enough to a gun, but not so close that it would be regulated. But the argument that I've heard from people and from the Biden administration is Congress did not intend to allow for that sort of escape valve. Congress intended for a very broad firearm regulation that would require people to, put serial numbers on and sell these guns through background checks, as opposed to, sort of drawing the line firm in the sand in the statute and then letting gun manufacturers sort of step over it if they wanted to.
We are on day number 2 of the term, hearing this big case, and the term does not end until next June. What's the feeling on when a ruling may come down on this case?
Well, typically the Supreme Court has started issuing decisions from cases that have had oral arguments in around December or January, but occasionally there are some big cases, and this is one of their bigger cases so far this term, that they won't issue a decision until June of next year. And in the meantime, this rule is in effect. The ATF is able to enforce this rule and make sure that these gun kits are sold with serial numbers and subject to background checks and things like that.
Michael Macagnone is legal affairs reporter for CQ Roll Call. You can find his articles at CQ.com and rollcall.com and on X at Michael Macagnone. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And now a bit of the Supreme Court oral argument in the case Garland v. Vanderstock. Justices Samuel Alito and Amy Coney Barrett questioning the Solicitor General, Elizabeth Prelogar.
Is it the case that components that can easily be converted into something constitute that thing before they are converted as a matter of ordinary usage?
I think that as a matter of ordinary usage, we're not suggesting that any statutory reference to one thing includes separate and distinct things that can be readily converted. So shifting to our arguments under framer-receiver, subparagraph
No,
B.
I want to stick with the definition of weapon for just a second.
Oh, sure.
I'm going to show you. Here's a blank pad, and here's a pen. All right? Is this a grocery list?
I don't think that that's a grocery list, but the reason for that is because there are a lot of things you could use those products for to create something other than a grocery list.
Right,
and so it's not like they're...
If I show you, I put out on a counter some eggs, some chopped up ham, some chopped up pepper and onions. Is that a Western omelet?
No, because again, those items have well-known other uses to become something other than an omelet. The key difference here is that these weapon parts kits are designed and intended to be used as instruments of combat, and they have no other conceivable use. And I think the further evidence comes from the fact that respondents themselves agree that a disassembled gun qualifies as a weapon. So this is on page 37
okay, so
of the
that's
Vanderstock
helpful.
brief.
So your definition is a group of components that are can readily be converted into something and have no other use. They must have no other use in order to constitute that thing.
In
that situation, they already constitute that thing.
I think that you can recognize that something is a weapon even if it's non-functional, if it is clear from objective evidence.
No, I think that certainly is true from the face of the statute, because it's sufficient if it's capable of being converted into something that can expel a projectile. All right, thank you.
General Prelogger, I just want to follow up on Justice Alito's question about the omelet. Would your answer change if you ordered it from HelloFresh and you got a kit and it was like turkey chili, but all of the ingredients are in the kit?
Yes, and I think that that presses on the more apt analogy here, which is that we are not suggesting that scattered components that might have some entirely separate and distinct function could be aggregated and called a weapon in the absence of this kind of evidence that that is their intended purpose and function. But if you bought, from Trader Joe's some omelet making kit that had all of the ingredients to make the omelet and maybe included whatever you would need to start the fire in order to cook the omelet and had all of that objective indication that that's what's being marketed and sold, we would recognize that for what it is. And it doesn't stretch plain English to say, I bought omelets at the store if you bought all of the ingredients that were intended and designed to make them, especially under statutory language that refers to something like breakfast foods or things that can be readily converted to make breakfast.
U.S. Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogger questioned by Supreme Court Justices Amy Coney Barrett and Samuel Alito in the oral argument today in the case Garland v. Vanderstock concerning the ATF's regulation on ghost guns. Attorney Pete Patterson represented Jennifer Vanderstock and gun rights groups. He got these questions from Chief Justice John Roberts.
What is the purpose of selling a receiver without the holes drilled in it?
Well, some individuals, just like some individuals enjoy working on their car every weekend, some individuals want to construct their own firearms. So the purpose of selling it is to allow,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is to assist and provide individuals with material with which they can do that.
Well, I mean, drilling a hole or two, I would think doesn't give the same sort of reward that you get from working on your car on the weekends.
Well, I would encourage the court to read the Vasquez brief. This is not a easy thing necessarily to do, and particularly the Press Democrat article cited there where the reporter engaged to show how easy this was, and in fact show that he couldn't actually do it. He had to engage friends to help him complete this that were expert in the firearms. And even once you have a complete frame, it's not a trivial matter to put that together. There are small parts that have to be put in precise locations. And that reporter, he couldn't put it together from the completed frame. So it's not clear that it is clearly not a trivial proposition for someone to do this.
Attorney Pete Patterson questioned by Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts. Today's oral argument in the case Garland v. Vanderstock. We covered it live on C-SPAN, and you can find the full oral argument. It runs about an hour, 15 minutes at our video library at cspan.org. The ATF's regulation on ghost guns was in 2022 during the Biden administration. Today, a reporter asked Emily Simons, White House Senior Deputy Press Secretary, about what might happen if the Supreme Court strikes it down.
Does the president have a plan B to stop the proliferation of ghost guns and other related tech should the Supreme Court rule against them in this challenge that started today?
So while I can't comment on pending cases before the court, what I can say broadly is that we know ghost guns are the weapon of choice for many gun traffickers because they are very difficult for law enforcement to trace and are available without a background check. In 2021, there were approximately 20,000 suspected ghost guns reported to the ATF. That's a 1,000% increase compared to 2017. So our administration remains committed to stopping illegal manufactures and sale of kits and parts that can easily be made into functional ghost guns.
Is the president, is he confident those rules and executive actions he took are legally sound?
We stand by the Justice Department's rulemaking to do this.
Emily Simons, White House Senior Deputy Press Secretary, holding a news conference on Air Force One. This is Washington Today. From Fox News, with a second powerful hurricane in less than 2 weeks bearing down on Florida, President Biden on Tuesday canceled an upcoming international trip in order to oversee federal storm preparations. and response efforts as the death toll rises and nearly 200,000 people remain without power or running water over a week and a half after Hurricane Helene tore a path of destruction through the southeast United States. Hurricane Milton, an extremely dangerous Category 4 storm, is on course to slam into Florida on Wednesday. That was from Fox News. We'll hear from President Biden in just a moment, but first, Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican of Florida, said at a news conference at the Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee this morning that time is running out for those in the evacuation areas to get out.
Almost entire west coast of the Florida Peninsula has the potential to have really significant storm surge. And when you're talking about 10 to 15 feet, that's obviously major. But we saw what even 4 feet did with Hurricane Helene in some of these communities. And so this is something that's really significant. There's hurricane warning in effect for Levy, Marion, Citrus, Sumter, Lake, Seminole, Hernando, Orange, Pasco, Pinellas, Hillsborough, Polk, Osceola, Manatee, Hardy, Highlands, Sarasota, DeSoto, Charlotte, and Lee counties. And then tropical storm warning in coastal Franklin, coastal Wakulla, coastal Jefferson, Taylor, Sewanee, Lafayette, Dixie, Gilchrist, Western Columbia, Western Alachua, Okeechobee, Glades, Hendry, Collier, Monroe, including the Florida Keys and the Dry Tortugas. We have a hurricane watch for Nassau, Duval, Clay, St. John's, Putnam, Flagler, Volusia, Brevard, Indian River, Okeechobee, Glades, Hendry, Collier, Dry Tortugas, and then a tropical storm watch Inland, Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, Eastern Columbia, Baker, Union, Bradford, Eastern Alachua, St. Lucie, Martin, Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade. So basically, the entire peninsula portion of Florida is under some type of either a watch or a warning. The Florida Division of Emergency Management is actively addressing storm-related resource requests. We are currently fulfilling close to 1,000 missions to support our local communities. That includes everything from tiger dams and generators to staff support, as well as food and water and tarps. We've also deployed more than 11,000 feet of flood protection systems, and we're prioritizing critical infrastructure like hospitals, wastewater treatment facilities, and electrical infrastructure. We've also done things like generators to support special needs sheltering operations. Of course, Starlink Internet. All counties have access to Starlink Internet devices and can use those as they see fit. More than 350 ambulances and more than 30 paratransits are in operation. We also have another 144 in staging that can be used if the need arises. The state of Florida is amassing fuel reserves ahead of Milton and staging it to be utilized as needed. We have been dispatching fuel over the past 24 hours as gas stations have run out.
Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican from Florida, news conference this morning in Tallahassee. ABC News reports that the Florida Aquarium in Tampa is moving animals to the facility's highest level ahead of Hurricane Milton. Usually aquarium and staff members will stay with the animals to ride out a Category 1 or 2 hurricane, but because of the severity of Milton, all staff members will evacuate midday Wednesday and plan to return on Thursday. In Washington, D.C., at the White House, President Joe Biden held a briefing on Hurricane Milton.
Thanks for your patience. As you know, I put out a statement this morning. I'm canceling my trip to Germany and to Africa. We're going to try to work those out later, but I just don't think I can be out of the country at this time, number one. And number two, we're going to stay focused on what's ahead of us right now. I've been briefed by the senior leaders of this administration and who are driving up preparedness for Hurricane Milton, which could be one of the worst storms in 100 years to hit Florida, and continued efforts on Hurricane Helene. I've directed this team to do everything it can to save lives and our communities, help our communities before, during, and after these extreme weather events. And that's being done. That's being done. I've spoken to all the political leaders in the region, some of them more than once, and I've told them anything they ask for they can get. We've given, and we've gotten overwhelming response, positive response from everyone from the governors of Florida up to North Carolina. And mayors, leaders, local, have expressed their sincere gratitude for the work of FEMA and for the work of my entire administration. Now, I've also surged thousands of federal personnel on the ground across the Southeast already and deliver every available resource as fast as possible. And my priority is to increase the size and presence of our effort. And as we prepare for another catastrophic storm about to make landfall, you know, I've been in constant contact with our director of the National Weather Service, Ken Graham, who's kept me informed the last several days of what to anticipate. You never know until it happens, but he's very, very engaged. He made clear to me just how dangerous this storm is, indicating that winds had reached up to 180 miles an hour. 180, that's not guaranteed it's going to hit the shore at 180 miles, but they've reached up to 180 miles an hour. And a possible storm surge as it hits the coast of Florida of 15 feet, which can be devastating. The current path of the storm is expected to Tampa Bay area and cut directly across the state, east to west, all the way across the state, with the potential for this storm to both enter Florida as a hurricane and leave Florida as a hurricane on the Atlantic coast. This could be the worst storm to hit Florida in over a century. And God willing, it won't be, but that's what it's looking like right now.
President Biden at the White House. When he finished his prepared remarks that also included a summary of federal help going to those hit by Hurricane Helene, a reporter asked the president a question about what some are saying about that relief. For instance, former President Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, posted on Truth Social on Monday, the great people of North Carolina are being stood up by Harris and Biden, who are giving almost all of the FEMA money to illegal migrants in what is now considered to be the worst rescue operation in the history of the United States. On top of that, billions of dollars is going to foreign countries. North Carolina has been virtually abandoned by Kamala. Drop her like she dropped you. Vote for President Donald Trump, MAGA 2024. That was the post by Donald Trump. Here again is President Biden.
Sir, what's the risk of political figures sharing misinformation during this time?
The past's prologue is real, but the fact of the matter is, I think we have, I've been able to contact all the governors. They are sticking up for what they've asked for. They're pointing out that they're satisfied with everything they're getting. But I can't speak for others on the internet. And I mean, just, look, those who do it to try to damage the administration. Well, we can take care of ourselves. But it misleads people. It puts people in circumstances where they panic, where they really, really, really worry. They think now they're not being taken care of. And it really is, it's going to sound, use an old phrase, it's un-American. It really is. People are scared to death. People know their lives are at stake. All that they've worked for, all that they own, all that they value. And it's just, anyway.
President Joe Biden at a hurricane briefing at the White House. The issue of hurricane relief and misinformation also came up during a rally with Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, Republican vice presidential nominee, in Detroit. He often answers reporters' questions after his speech at these type of events.
Thank you, Senator. Historian with CBS News. You said in an interview with Newsmax yesterday that FEMA was disaster relief was being used to fund to focus on migrants, rather. Donald Trump also said on Truth Social that most, if not all, of the money that FEMA spent is on migrants. FEMA officials say that's just not true. What evidence do you guys have to suggest that?
So here's the evidence. And by the way, I just want to make an observation about these reporters, and I appreciate the question is, you know, when people say that they feel endangered by a crowd voicing their opinion, well, look, my friends, the First Amendment goes in both directions. And so you haven't made this criticism, to be clear, but I read some article, it was in some, I forget who published it, but they were like, well, journalists don't feel safe and at some of our events. Look, Not a single person here is going to harm you. They're just going to speak their mind, and they have every right to do it. So God bless you guys. The First Amendment, we believe in it in this country. But sir, my point is about the focus of our current administration. And if you use resources, but most importantly, if you put people on the task of dealing, let's say, with a massive influx of illegal immigration, then they're going to be distracted from doing their core job of keeping Americans safe in response to a disaster. Each of us, this is true of me, it's true of everybody in the world, we only got so much time to focus, and there's only so much time in the day. And if you take FEMA and you turn it into an agency that resettles illegal immigrants, that's going to take their focus away from keeping people safe after a hurricane. That's basic human reality. And I think there's no way around it. Now, what the fact checkers say, and we'll sort of, we'll try to be as fair to the other side as possible, my friends. What the fact checkers will say is, well, there's a bucket of money that goes to illegal immigrants, and that's a different bucket of money that goes to disaster relief. Well, I'm sure the Biden administration has never moved money from one bucket to the other. In 3.5 years, we know that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are more than willing to move money from one bucket to another if it suits their purpose. They ought to be moving money to the bucket that supports American citizens in the wake of these terrible storms. That's what I would like them to do. But the final point I want to make about this is just bureaucratic focus. Look, I've seen a lot of wild stuff out there on the internet. The problem with what I've seen from the Biden administration is that they're not focused on getting resources to people that need it. When Kamala Harris is out at a fundraiser in San Francisco, meanwhile North Carolina is drowning, North Carolinians have every right to say, where the hell is our vice president and why isn't she focused on us? That focus has got to change. The 82nd Airborne. And this is in 2010. You're never going to hear me praise Barack Obama. You rarely hear me praise Barack Obama. But in 2010, there was a terrible earthquake in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. A ton of people lost their lives. A ton of people had their livelihoods destroyed. The 82nd Airborne was in Port-au-Prince, Haiti under Barack Obama 48 hours later. North Carolina is an hour away from the 82nd Airborne's headquarters. Why did it take a week to get the 82nd Airborne on the ground helping American citizens? It's disgraceful.
Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, the Republican vice presidential nominee in Detroit, holding a rally and, as he often does, taking questions from reporters. Congressman Chuck Edwards, Republican from North Carolina, his 11th congressional district is in the western part of the state that was hit hard by Hurricane Helene. Writing today on X, while it's true that FEMA's response to Hurricane Helene has not been perfect, there are outrageous rumors that have been circulated online and need to be addressed. He then attached a list of 8 of them, including Hurricane Helene was not geoengineered by the government to seize and access lithium deposits in Chimney Rock. Local officials are not abandoning search and rescue efforts to bulldoze over Chimney Rock. FEMA has not diverted disaster response funding to the border or foreign aid, and FEMA cannot seize your property or land. Story from the Washington Post: after taking over the Democratic ticket, picking a running mate, staging a convention, and turning in a strong debate performance, Vice President Kamala Harris is now embracing potentially the riskiest test of a presidential campaign, the day-to-day grind of unscripted interviews. This week alone, Harris is appearing on CBS News' 60 Minutes, at a Univision town hall with Howard Stern on SiriusXM, on Late Night with Stephen Colbert, and on the Call Her Daddy podcast. Her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, is rounding out a West Coast swing with an appearance on the Smartless podcast and a taped appearance with Jimmy Kimmel Live. That was from the Washington Post. The first stop for Vice President Harris today was The View on ABC News.
As vice president, you've worked very closely with President Biden for almost 4 years. He was here on our show, and he said there wasn't a single thing that he did that you could not do. What do you think would be the biggest specific difference between your presidency and a Biden presidency?
Well, we're obviously two different people, and we have a lot of shared life experiences. For example, the way we feel about our family and our parents and so on. But we're also different people, and I will bring those sensibilities to how I lead. For example, I know we're going to talk today, but one of the issues that I'm very focused on is what we do around home health care.
Yes.
I have done a lot of work as it relates to, sadly, but violence against women and children. I care a lot about that. I love our small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me predominantly, but we had what we called a second mother who lived 2 houses down who helped my mother raise us. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. And so the influence of a personal experience will have its impact on the presidency.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact. The work that we have done, for example, capping the cost of insulin at $35 a month for our seniors is something I care deeply about allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices and bring the cost of prescription medication down for seniors, but my intention is to expand that for all Americans. The work we have done to invest in American industries, whether it be in terms of manufacturing and creating almost 800,000 new jobs around manufacturing. Those were all a shared priority.
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, part of her appearance on ABC's The View today. Later in the interview, she spoke more about her proposal, announced on that show, to expand Medicare to pay for in-home health care, addressing the so-called sandwich generation, those caring for aging parents and young children at the same time. New York Times article about that proposal says of the current situation, while Medicaid will pay for a home aid if someone is poor or has no assets, there are long waiting lists to qualify, and in many areas of the country, there is a severe shortage of workers because of low wages and better, less stressful jobs in other businesses. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, retweeted the clip of Kamala Harris you just heard, adding, "We told you, and now Kamala Harris has told you." She openly admits she would not have done anything differently than Joe Biden. High prices for gas and groceries, open borders, high crime, endless wars. A Harris administration is just 4 more years of the same failed policies. That post from House Speaker Mike Johnson. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN Now is a free mobile app featuring your unfiltered view of what's happening in Washington, live and on demand. Keep up with the day's biggest events with live streams of floor proceedings and hearings from the U.S. Congress, White House events, the courts, campaigns, and more from the world of politics, all at your fingertips. You can also stay current with the latest episodes of Washington Journal and find scheduling information for C-SPAN's TV networks and C-SPAN Radio, plus a variety of compelling podcasts. C-SPAN Now is available at the Apple Store and Google Play. Scan the QR code to download it for free today or visit our website, cspan.org/C-SPAN Now. C-SPAN Now, your front row seat to Washington, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. From CBS News, President Biden on Tuesday announced $2.6 billion in funding to replace all lead pipes in the United States as part of a new EPA rule that will require lead pipes to be identified and replaced within 10 years using the new funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. President Biden made the announcement in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
We're here today because we're finally addressing an issue that should have been addressed a long time ago in this country. The danger the lead pipes pose to our drinking water. For too long, local communities have known how important it was to deal with this problem. It hadn't been given the national priority it demanded, though. I'm here today to tell you that I'm finally insisting that it gets prioritized, and I'm insisting it get done. One of the most important things we're doing today is establishing a new rule that every lead pipe providing clean drinking water doesn't provide clean water must be replaced, every single one. Not only are we setting a priority, we're showing up as a partner to get it done. Over the past couple of years, we provided billions of dollars to states and communities to address this problem. And today, I'm announcing an additional $2 billion in grants to states and local communities to get the job done. It matters. Folks, people all asking me, why do we have lead pipes in the first place? Probably ask yourself that. How'd that happen? Well, it's because when they were first put in place a long time ago, lead pipes were incredibly durable and they didn't rust. But since then, we've learned that lead pipes also leach poisonous toxins into the water that lead to terrible health consequences, particularly in the development of a child's brain. Think about what that does to a parent's peace of mind.
President Joe Biden today in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. On the flight from Washington to Milwaukee on Air Force One, the EPA Administrator Michael Regan held a news conference and got questions about the announcement today about lead pipe removal.
The window, 10 years, this is very ambitious, and there's obviously a lot of pipes that need to be replaced in this country. But how do you get that done? And is there worry that, it's not just one administration that you're going to have to go through, it's at least two to get to this goal? Is there a concern that not just one Republican administration could undo this, but perhaps two? Like, why should Americans be confident that this is actually going to get done?
Well, listen, in my conversations, I have to tell you, I would hope that both Republicans and Democrats would want to remove lead and lead service lines from impacting our children. We know that it causes learning impairments, heart disease. We know that this rule will save or prevent over 900,000 low birth weights. So, listen, it's a bipartisan issue. Everyone wants this lead out. That's the first thing. The second thing is that many of these cities are already moving forward. Just under the president's watch over the last 3.5 years, over 367,000 lead pipes have been removed. We know that this rule will get 99% of all of the cities who say they can step up and can do this, especially with the bill funding. So we believe it can get done. The cities have indicated that they want to get it done. No one wants to roll back this rule or roll back these health protections, especially given that it's tied to bipartisan infrastructure law money. So we feel confident. By the way, the rule is legally durable. It's scientifically sound, well within the four corners of the Clean Water Act. We feel very confident that it's legally durable, scientifically sound, and that there are resources flowing to help these mayors and these county commissioners and these local governments all over the country.
In retrospect, is there any wish that you guys started earlier on this and actually the implementation?
This is a very complicated rule. We started on day one. It's taken us some time to really put the rule in place. We had to roll back a rule that the Trump administration put in place that was not as protective. So we had to do that due diligence in the process and put forward a legally sound, scientifically relevant rule. And listen, by the way, let me just say that we've also, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, given a lot of cities the resources to specifically identify where these lead service lines are. So the identification process has occurred. States feel confident. Now it's time to go.
EPA Administrator Michael Regan holding a news conference on Air Force One during the flight from Washington to Milwaukee. Story from the Washington Post. The White House estimates that more than 9 million homes across the country are still supplied by lead pipelines, which are the leading source of lead contamination through drinking water. The EPA has projected that replacing all of them could cost at least $45 billion. Wall Street today, the Dow up 126, NASDAQ up 259, S&P up 55. Story from the New York Times. America's federal budget deficit rose to $1.8 trillion in the 2024 fiscal year, reaching the highest level in 3 years, according to new Congressional Budget Office estimates released on Tuesday. The increase from last year's $1.7 trillion deficit came as tax revenue failed to keep pace with the rising costs of government programs and the mounting interest on the national debt. The figures show the continuing fiscal strain facing the U.S. economy, where the national debt is approaching $36 trillion. That was from the New York Times. Turning to the Middle East. From Reuters, Israeli forces have killed the would-be successors of late Hezbollah leader Syed Hassan Nasrallah, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Tuesday, without naming them. We've degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. We took out thousands of terrorists, including Nasrallah himself and Nasrallah's replacement and the replacement of the replacement, Netanyahu said in a pre-recorded video message. That was from Reuters. In that same video, the prime minister made an appeal directly to the people of Lebanon, much as he recently did with a video to appeal to the people of Iran.
Israel withdrew from Lebanon 25 years ago, but the country that actually conquered Lebanon is not Israel, it's Iran. Iran, which finances and arms Hezbollah to serve Iran's interests at Lebanon's expense. Hezbollah has turned Lebanon into a stockpile of ammunition and weapons and a forward Iranian military base. Just one day after the October 7th massacre a year ago, Hezbollah joined the war against Israel. It launched an unprovoked attack on our cities and on our citizens. It has since fired over 8,000 missiles at Israel, killing civilians without distinctions, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Druze. Israel has decided to put an end to this. We've decided to do whatever is necessary to return our people safely to their homes. Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel also has a right to win, and Israel will win. We've degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. We took out thousands of terrorists, including Nasrallah himself, and Nasrallah's replacement, and the replacement of his replacement. Today, Hezbollah is weaker than it's been for many, many years. Now you, the Lebanese people, you stand at a significant crossroads. It is your choice. You can now take back your country. You can return it to a path of peace and prosperity. If you don't, Hezbollah will continue to try to fight Israel from densely populated areas at your expense. It doesn't care if Lebanon is dragged into a wider war. Christians, Druze, Muslims, Sunnis, and Shiites, all of you are suffering because of Hezbollah's futile war against Israel.
Video message from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. CNN writes, in his new book, legendary journalist Bob Woodward offers a remarkable look behind the scenes at President Joe Biden's blunt, profanity-laced assessments and interactions with the world leaders who have shaped his presidency, from Benjamin Netanyahu to Vladimir Putin. Biden declared privately about the Israeli Prime Minister to one of his associates in the spring of 2024 as Israel's war in Gaza intensified. Woodward writes, that son of a bitch, Bibi Netanyahu, he's a bad guy, he's a bad effing guy. That effing Putin, Biden said to advisors in the Oval Office not long after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, according to Woodward. Putin is evil. We are dealing with the epitome of evil. That was from CNN. Emily Simons, the White House senior deputy press secretary, answered questions about the book and recent reports about U.S.-Israeli relations during her news conference on Air Force One today.
On Israel, there was a report in Axios this morning that the U.S. officials said that they had sort of lost trust with Israel and conveying their planned activities. There's also Bob Woodward's book in which which the president reportedly used some language to describe Prime Minister Netanyahu that we might normally hear at a Phillies game instead of in the Oval Office. So I'm wondering, do you agree with that assessment that the trust has broken down between the U.S. and Israel? And are you taking any steps to try to get it back on track at this crucial period?
The commitment that we have to the state of Israel is ironclad. The relationship between Netanyahu and the president goes back decades. They can have very honest and straightforward conversations with each other. Just yesterday, President Biden spoke with President Herzog on the anniversary of October 7th and spoke about a range of issues, including the need for peace and what the Israeli people have been through in this past year, and also what the Palestinian people have been through in the hope for peace in the coming months.
So the relationship is fine, or those reports are incorrect? Or?
The relationship between the United States and the state of Israel is as strong as ever.
Emily Simons, White House senior deputy press secretary, news conference on Air Force One. More on Israel in just a moment, but more now on Bob Woodward's new book. USA Today writes that former President Donald Trump has spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin as many as 7 times since leaving the White House, according to reporting from a new book by journalist Bob Woodward. The conversations cover a period before and after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. While he was still president, Trump secretly shipped Putin COVID-19 testing machines when such testing was rare, Woodward's book reports. a copy of which was obtained by USA Today in advance of the October 15th release. Putin, who was fearful of infection, told Trump, "Please don't tell anyone you sent these to me," Woodward writes. Trump replied, "I don't care, fine." Trump campaign spokesman Stephen Chung rejected Woodward's reporting in a statement, calling it made-up stories from a truly demented and deranged man. That was from USA Today. And now back to Israel. This from the Times of Israel. The Defense Ministry has informed the Pentagon that it is postponing Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's trip to the U.S., where he had been scheduled to meet tomorrow with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, a U.S. Defense Department spokesperson announced. The confirmation follows reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been blocking Gallant's visit because he wants to first speak with Biden about Israel's planned retaliation against Iran and wants the Security Cabinet to first approve the planned response. That was from Times of Israel. The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh got questions about this at her news conference today.
I guess you are aware of some reports are saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu asked Minister Gallant not to go to Washington. I guess you are aware of that, and if you have anything to say in regards to those reports.
Thanks for the question. I am aware of those reports, and I think I'm going to stay out of Israeli politics.
I mean, would you rule out such a thing between U.S.-Israel relations?
I don't have any comment on the reporting that's coming out of the region. What I can tell you is that the Secretary has a great relationship with Minister Gallant. I think they've now spoken probably over 80 times, ballpark. They remain in constant communication, whether it be an in-person meeting here or, meetings, phone calls that need to be done remote. That relationship still maintains and can be done, at any time, any place in the world, including when the Secretary is back on, has been on travel and taken calls, over the Mid-Atlantic.
Okay. My last question is, we all know that Secretary Austin was planning to go to Israel, and then he canceled it. And then now Minister Gallant was planning to come to the Pentagon tomorrow, and then it got postponed. Is it fair to say that there are kind of tension between both Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant?
No, to the contrary. I would push back on that. I don't think there's tension. I don't think, you can have frank, you can have direct conversations with your friends. You're not always going to agree on everything, but that doesn't mean that there's tensions. I certainly wouldn't read into anything there. Okay.
So then
Another
on
question.
The same page. Can we say that?
Could you expand on what you mean by they're not on the same page?
I mean, in regards to, let's say, in regards to how Israel is going to strike back on Iran.
What I will tell you, Joe, is that we are talking to them about their response. I wouldn't read too much into that, other than that's all I'm going to be able to say at this moment.
The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh holding a news conference today at the Pentagon. And finally, on Washington today, a story from Roll Call, former Congressman David L. Hobson, Republican of Ohio, who served 9 terms before retiring after the 2008 elections, died Sunday. His family announced he was 87. Hobson, who represented a swath of southwest Ohio that included Springfield, was first elected to Congress in 1990, replacing now Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. He was a staunch advocate for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in his district, as well as the Springfield Air National Guard Base. Though a loyal Republican, Hobson had an independent streak, consistent with fellow Republicans DeWine and George V. Voinovich, another Ohio governor who also served 2 Senate terms. That was from Roll Call. David Hobson spoke for the last time on the House floor in Washington, D.C. in September 2008, saying goodbye to other members retiring that year and reflecting on his own service. This from the C-SPAN video library.
I've really enjoyed serving in Congress. It's been an honor for all of us, I'm sure, to have been here to work with our colleagues. And I know when you look on TV, you say, oh, you watch this floor sometimes and you say, all they do is bicker amongst themselves. Well, you see it here, but you don't see the great work that goes on behind the scenes where members get together and work together, talk together, and get the country's work done. And I think it's unfortunate that the public doesn't understand the great friendships that are here across the aisle and within delegations as we do our work in furthering the work of this country on behalf of all the citizens of this country. So it's, you know, I knew it was time for me to leave. I didn't know Ralph or Deborah where they were going to be at the point, but I made up my decision. We each made up our own decisions, and I knew that it was time to move on. But I got to tell you, it's been a pleasure to work with everyone in this Congress, and especially our delegation, both Democrats and Republicans. We have not had the rancor between Democrats and Republicans, and I'm really saddened tonight when we do this, not for us, but there's two people who are not here that were dear friends of mine. Paul Gilmore, I wouldn't be here if Paul Gilmore hadn't gotten me appointed to the state Senate. And Stephanie Tubbs Jones became one of my best friends. We traveled all over the world looking at military bases together.
Former Congressman David Hobson, Republican of Ohio, in 2008 on the House floor. He was retiring after 18 years in the House. There was also tributes to other retiring members of Congress. Dave Hobson has died at the age of 87. Governor Mike DeWine, who used to be a congressman in that seat, putting out a statement. Dave worked well with everyone, and both Democrats and Republicans appreciated his good judgment and ability to reach common ground. He was a patriot and always wanted to do what was in America's best interests. He brought compassion, practicality, and wisdom to everything he did. He was a true public servant for his district, the Miami Valley, and the state of Ohio. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.